Welcome to Let's Talk Kenmore, a lighthearted podcast aimed at connecting citizens to their local government and demystifying the role of government in the city of Kenmore. I am your host, Amber Clifton. Today, I have the honor of speaking with Kenmore's mayor, Nigel Herbig. Mayor Herbig walks me through his journey to local politics, why engaging in local government is valuable, and what he is most excited about for Kenmore's future. Please enjoy this episode of Let's Talk Kenmore. Mayor Herbig, welcome to the show. It's such a privilege to be able to speak with you today.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
How are you?
I am good. I'm good. It's a beautiful day here in Kenmore, and it's a good day.
So I am really excited for myself and for our residents to be able to get to know you a little bit better. So if you don't mind, can you tell me sort of what your professional background is?
Yeah, I started off in politics back over 20 years ago. I'm aging myself now. It was on the Howard Dean campaign. I was working in radio at the time, and it was for this nationally syndicated overnight talk show I was producing, and I had to work until 5 a.m., I think, that morning or something. Oh. Yeah. We had to manually run the tape for the last couple of hours. But the nice thing with working till 5, which wasn't my regular schedule, was that, the donut shops were freshly opened. There were fresh donuts and fresh coffee and all that. So I went and I stopped by a local donut shop, picked up a donut, picked up a copy of The Stranger, which had just come out that morning. And in it, there was an article about this governor from Vermont that was running for president. And I was inspired, and I reached out to the local campaign office, and I started volunteering there. And then eventually I got hired on by the campaign, made some really good friends in that kind of pressure cooker of an environment for the few months I was there.
Sure.
And since then, I've worked for environmental groups. I've worked for labor groups. I've worked for a few different elected officials at different levels. Most recently, I worked in the state legislature for a while, for almost 9 years, actually, for 2 different members of the state house. And, what really got me into politics and government is because, government is how we make the decisions and how we make the investments that we can't make by ourselves, right? It's nobody's building their own road, or at least most people aren't building their own road, right?
Let's hope not. Yeah.
People aren't building their own parks, right? People aren't building that sort of, their own stormwater system. I mean, some folks are, but it's not a thing that people usually do by themselves. And politics is how you kind of ensure that the government is doing what you want it to do. And so that's been where I've worked for the last, I guess, almost 20 years at this point. And then currently my day job, I work at the King County Regional Homelessness Authority because, again, I see that as a place that aligns with my values and it's addressing one of the most pressing issues we have as a region.
Yeah.
And, I get to do good work there also. So that's kind of my outside of City Hall career.
Wow, that's incredible. That could be its own episode. I would love to pick your brain about the King County. That's amazing. And you worked in radio.
Yeah, it was ages ago. I was when I was in college at UW. When I first started going to UW, I walked in, I was an 18-year-old. I hadn't done a whole ton of research on where I wanted to go or what I wanted to do. But, I walked into the communications building, and they literally had a sign saying, if you want to do radio, you need to go to the Edward R. Murrow School at Wazoo. They had just gotten rid of the broadcasting track in their communications school, which I really think is ridiculous, seeing as they own 2 FCC licenses. And, they own the one for KOW and the one for now KEXP. But they got rid of the kind of student track with all of that, I guess, the year before I'd gotten there, which is a real shame. So what I did was I studied the 2 things that everybody, my interest at the time was talk radio. And so I studied the 2 things everybody has an opinion about, politics and religion. So I have a double major in comparative religion and political science. And while I was there, I think it was my senior year or something, there was this local morning show host team that I'd grown up listening to, Bob Rivers. He was on 99.9 when I was a kid, KSW.
Uh-huh.
He would do parody songs and all that sort of stuff. And I loved him as a kid growing up. And he had left KSW and had signed a contract with Infinity Radio. And he had a non-compete that he had to work out, that he couldn't be in the Seattle market for a year or whatever it was. But in their effort to kind of make sure that they kept the chemistry and kind of kept their legs under them as a show, they syndicated out. So they were working out of Seattle, out of Infinity Radio there, but they were, instead of broadcasting in Seattle because they couldn't because of a contractual disagreement, they were broadcasting into, I think, Phoenix and a few other markets kind of on the West Coast area. And so I saw this was happening. I don't even know how I came across the information that they were syndicating. And I reached out to their producer kind of out of the blue. I figured out who their producer was. And I wrote the guy, I go, hey, listen, I'm not a communication student, but like, this is something I'm really passionate about, would like to learn about. And I grew up listening to Bob, is there an opportunity to intern? And he said, yes, as long as you're willing to be here at like 6 a.m. in the morning, because it was a morning show. And even when you get there at 6, there were people who had been there since 3:30 preparing stuff for, well, they go on the air at 6. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, but it was a really fun experience. And I worked for Infinity for a little bit, doing board op work and that sort of thing. And then eventually landed over at, I'm not even sure if they're still around anymore. It's called Jones Radio Networks. They ran, who did they have? They had Delilah was one of their big.
I remember Delilah. Did she do the Lights Out love songs?
Yeah, something like that. It was a bunch of call-in stuff.
Yeah.
I wasn't working on that one, but they also had Leah, who was big in the country music scene as a syndicated DJ. And then they decided to try doing talk radio. And so they had something called America Live. And it was kind of we had something like 80 stations, I think. Our most active. Yeah, it was interesting. Our most active affiliate, or at least kind of market, was Birmingham, Alabama. It was right as one of the Gulf Wars was starting. And so it was really interesting getting these calls from Birmingham, Alabama and having to screen the calls and do all of that. But yeah, I worked in, I loved radio, but unfortunately it's kind of a dying business right now with all the consolidation. One of my favorite shows used to be on Cairo. It was called Too Beautiful to Live. And it got canceled back off the radio side, I don't know, 15 years ago. And they've been they've been doing a viewer sponsored model now going on, I think 15 years now with, it's kind of sad to me that I listen to the radio nowadays and it's not as much live and local, product. It's just not the same as it was when I was a kid. And I realize I sound like an old man yelling at a cloud when I say that, but there's something romantic about driving around, listening to a local, talk show at like 12:30 in the morning, and knowing that guy is sitting there in some building drinking coffee and, taking calls in the middle of the night, but that doesn't exist anymore.
I agree. I know. Well, we're doing like a little version of that. Our Kenmore residents are going to be listening to you sitting down the street in some little nook at City Hall, talking about local stuff here. So you started there, and then what was sort of your path to becoming mayor of Kenmore? How did that unfold?
So I grew up in Seattle, North Seattle. My parents are still in the house they bought in like 1976 in Wallingford. After we had my daughter, we were looking for a place to buy, and Seattle at the time, and this was, 16 years ago, was too expensive for us. I was at the time working for a environmental political nonprofit. My wife was working in retail. And so we started looking around outside of Seattle. My dad was like, why don't you look in Wallingford? And I was like, do you have any idea what your house is worth, Dad?
My parents, just as a quick aside, my dad bought his home the year he graduated from high school. He's in Kirkland, just beyond the Kenmore border in like the Finn Hill neighborhood. And same thing. It's like, why don't you just buy? I'm like, do you know that I paid more for my car than what you bought your home for? Yeah. Anyway, I can relate. Go on.
Yeah, no, it's funny. My parents bought their place. They were probably 22 or 23 at the time, for I think $36,000. I did the math. If it followed normal inflation, it would be about $160,000. But unfortunately, housing doesn't follow normal inflation, which explains why our housing market is so broken right now. I mean, a couple of 22-year-olds were able to buy a house when they were both working in food service.
Right.
And that is not the reality we live in anymore, unfortunately. Anyway, so I grew up in Seattle. We were looking for a place to raise our child and my daughter. And like she was a baby at the time. And so we ended up buying a condo in Kenmore, not that far away from City Hall. And I was working in politics, but I wasn't really paying too close attention to local stuff until the new City Hall got built, literally like kitty corner from where I live. And being that I was a politically active person, I was interested. I started just going to the meetings and following what was going on. And at the time, they built a brand new city hall, and this is like 2011 or something. They weren't live streaming the meetings at all. All they had was these really low quality audio recordings of the meetings that were available days after the fact. And even in 2011, that seemed a little anachronistic. It didn't seem... I knew there was ways they could be doing this,
Sure.
that they could be streaming and making it easier for folks. So I started showing up to the meetings with my laptop and I set up a Twitter account at Kenmore Politics. It's been fairly dormant now for 10 years. But I started live tweeting the meetings because I knew there were folks that wanted to know what was going on, but couldn't make it to City Hall on a Monday night.
Yeah.
And so I started live tweeting the meetings, and I had a couple hundred followers, and I had people that would, they were making dinner or putting their kids to bed, but they would also be like replying to my tweets and asking me for clarification on what was going on. And occasionally I'd even get a clarification on Twitter from our city manager, Rob, in the middle of the meeting if I got something slightly wrong. So I was live tweeting the meetings. And then it might've been late 2012, early 2013. I was grabbing coffee with the deputy mayor at the time, Bob Hensel, and he told me he was going to be retiring. And I said, well, Bob, we're going to have to find somebody to run for your seat. And he says, well, I'll endorse you if you want to run. And I thought about it a little bit. And so in 2013, I ran for office, ran for city council. I wasn't sure what the politics were of Kenmore at the time, because at the time the council was very conservative. And, just based on who was on the council, I just wasn't sure where the general Kenmore population was on politics. So I looked at the 2012 election results, and, I looked at Inslee and Obama, and I think gay marriage and pot legalization were all on the ballot in 2012. And so I looked at those, and I looked at Kenmore, and I saw actually, Kenmore is actually more progressive than its council by far. They voted in the 60% area for Obama, low 60s, high 50s for Inslee, and then kind of mid 50s, I think, for pot legalization and gay marriage. And that really kind of hit me that the council, I think, was a little out of touch with a lot of the population of the city. Mm-hmm. And that also showed that somebody with my progressive politics could probably win if I wanted to. I just don't think people were really running before. I could be wrong. So I ran, got elected in 2013, got reelected in 2017, and was chosen at that point to be deputy mayor. Yeah. And then after I was reelected in 2021, I got elected mayor. And in our form of government, it's a little different than what people think of when they think of mayor and councils. And in other cities, like say Seattle, in a place like that, they have what's called a strong mayor, mm-hmm. who, runs the day-to-day operations of the city and, is where the buck stops. In our form of government, it's called council manager form of government. The council selects a mayor and a deputy mayor amongst themselves. And my job is essentially to chair the meetings and then also be the public face for, if there's interview requests, or if we're putting out a press release and we need a quote in it, or if there's a ribbon cutting and they need somebody to handle the big scissors, that falls on me. So, yeah. And we have a city manager who reports directly to the city council, who actually runs the day-to-day operations of the city. He's a professional, and that's what he's done his entire career. And he's very good at it. We're very lucky to have him. That is how I've ended up being mayor. Like I said, I've been mayor now for 2.5 years. So one 2-year term is a full 2-year term as mayor, and then another, and I'm in, the first 7 months of my second 2-year term as mayor. So,
wow, that's incredible. I love that you were just tweeting out the council meeting. I mean, it's pretty savvy. That's pretty cool.
That's not why. I mean, I wasn't doing it for political gain or anything. I just thought it was frankly atrocious that they had a brand new city hall and then that they didn't have live streaming going on.
Yeah.
I mean, it was not as easy as live streaming now, but in 2011, it wasn't super difficult to live stream either. Sure. And then the real kicker, I thought, was once I got here, I found out that City Hall was actually, and council chambers were actually wired for audio and video. The wiring was in the wall. And for some reason or other, they had chosen to not put in a camera and do all of that. And so the nice thing is because I ran in 2013 on, I ran on kind of 3 things, sidewalks, government transparency, including, live streaming meetings, that sort of thing. And then our waterfront. And because I ran on that, because I won, it was kind of hard for it was easy for me to convince my colleagues then to move forward with installing the cameras and live streaming our meetings. And that's really paid off well, I think, for the city, because like I said, a lot of folks can't make it to City Hall on a Monday at 7. But also kind of the only good thing that came out of COVID was that it opened up a lot of cities to hybrid meetings.
Mm-hmm.
and making it easier for folks to participate remotely. And so, it kind of forced us to do that because nobody was at City Hall. We were running all of our meetings
Right.
totally on Zoom and getting our public comment through Zoom. But then once we returned in person, it's a lot easier for some folks to jump on the phone while they're making dinner or whatever and give us their 3 minutes of public comment. So we're hearing from folks who we wouldn't have heard from if they were forced to drive down to City Hall, find parking, walk in, wait around, and then go up in front of everybody and get their 3 minutes.
Yeah.
It's also, frankly, for a lot of folks, having to be in front of a small crowd to give their 3 minutes is also a barrier for some folks. So being able to do it on Zoom is easier for folks, even if they could make it to City Hall. So that's kind of the one good thing that I think that came out of COVID. And I'm glad that we held on to that as a city.
Yeah, I agree. Kind of gives access to everybody. So what would you say then right now are the council's top priorities?
So yeah, our top 2 priorities are ones we've been doing a lot of work on, which are increasing our options for affordable housing. I mean, like every other city in the region, we're dealing with a housing crisis. And then implement our climate action plan to find ways for the city to participate in lowering our carbon emissions and addressing climate change. And then we have, at least for 2024, we had 10 total priorities. So, we have a focus on multimodal transportation, which is kind of a wonky way of saying focusing in on all forms of transportation, including pedestrian and bicycle safety. And an important part of that for me is our Target Zero resolution that we passed after 2 really tragic deaths back in 2014 in my first year on council.
Oh.
We passed a resolution saying that we wanted to have 0 pedestrian or bicyclist deaths or serious injuries, I think by 2025. We've been very lucky the last few years and we haven't had any deaths or serious injuries. And that resolution has kind of changed how we approach road design and other things too, which is increased safety. We've been working on our financial sustainability plan. That's one of our priorities for the year, and that'll get finished up this year. We're doing a lot of work around diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility to make sure that the city is working for everybody and that we're making sure that the city policies we're passing work for everybody and that we're listening to a lot of communities that maybe aren't able to make it again on a Monday at 7 o'clock. We are always seeking opportunities to activate the Lake Point property, Lake Washington. Public safety, social justice reform, that's number 7. Economic development is number 8. Community engagement, and then post-pandemic recovery. So those are our priorities for 24. We've since passed new ones for next year, but those don't go into effect until 2025. So.
Right. Wow. That's awesome. Those are all, it must be hard to prioritize because they're all so important, right?
Yeah. I mean, in any city, there are a lot of things that people want to do. People want to do so many, people run for office because they have a lot of ideas and they want to do a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
And, a city our size, we can't do everything all at once, of course. And, we have a small staff, super dedicated staff, hardworking staff, really smart. But again, can't clone people essentially, and we can't afford to hire a bunch of new people. So yeah, we do need to prioritize what we do as a city. And we do that through a process. We have a council retreat, usually kind of mid-year, to set priorities for the next year. And we do that, and this year we did a little bit earlier. We did in April. And as a council, we sit down and we have a discussion around what the city's doing, what our opportunities are that are coming up. And we look at the previous year's priorities. And then if folks have a new policy idea or a new priority idea, they can present that to the rest of the council, see if they have support. We end up essentially voting each item against each other. So it's like, we would go, it's a really interesting process, but like our facilitator would put up a big thing and you have all the priorities we all agreed on, we're going to be included. And then you go, okay, affordable housing or climate action plan. And you have to pick one.
Oh my gosh.
And it forces you to it forces you to prioritize. And then we go through that whole thing. So then you go, affordable housing versus multimodal transportation, raise your hand. And then you keep doing it. So it's called paired comparison. So you compare each one and then you add up all the votes and then they get ranked. I know I kind of sometimes have to rank them for myself so that as the questions are happening quickly, I know kind of which way I want to vote.
Sure.
So anyway, it helps give us, our priorities for the year. It helps rank the priorities, and the rankings are there is some weight that's carried with the rankings too. Top 5 are used when we're evaluating our city manager at the end of the year. Mm-hmm. And so his job performance is based off the performance of the top 5. And so a little bit extra focus gets put on those. But yeah, that's how we do that. And we, of course, before we do all of that work with our council retreat, we're continuously listening to the public, seeing what issues are popping up during public comment, talking to folks at Coffee with Council, talking to our friends and neighbors, as we're at the supermarket, whatever, and trying to get a better sense of kind of where folks' priorities are. So yeah, that's how we set our priorities.
I love that. What would you say you've been most proud of during your time as mayor?
I'm not sure if it's my most proud of its time, during my tenure as mayor, but on council, I'm proud of the work we have done to make Kenmore a safer place for bicyclists and pedestrians. We were unincorporated King County until 1998. Mm-hmm. And King County was never going to make the investments that we needed. And I think that's part of why folks voted to incorporate Kenmore, so that we could kind of steer our own ship and set our own direction. And so we had a lot of catching up to do as far as basic things like sidewalks.
Right.
And, I'm proud to be able to say that since I've joined council, I think we've built 6 or 7 miles worth of sidewalks throughout the city. And this is including the walkways and waterways projects that we did along 180 and 68th, but it's also a lot of other stuff sprinkled throughout the city. And we also built well over 6 miles of bike lanes throughout the city also. So we're trying to make it easier for folks to get around safely without needing to jump in the car, because before we did all of this work, even streets like 68th didn't have sidewalks, like none. Gosh. Even like in front of where City Hall is now, there weren't sidewalks. You were just kind of walking on the side of a road, and it didn't feel great. And I remember even when I first moved here, there were parts of 522 that didn't have sidewalks.
That's scary.
Yeah, it is. And the city took the initiative, and this is before I was on council, but I was involved in some of the project was still going on when I joined council. But the city really took the reins on that one and redid 522 to make it safer with the medians and all of that, because before it was just a wide open road. And there were, you had head-on collisions and things like that happening. And now we have medians, and it's a lot safer. But they also built sidewalks along 522. And what I think is funny about that is I was talking with our previous mayor, David Baker, and he said that people at the time were actually questioning why you would put sidewalks on 522, because, he said people would say, well, nobody's ever walking that route anyway, so why would you put sidewalks there? It's like, yeah, there's a reason why nobody's walking. It's not safe. Nobody wants to be walking on the side of the road as a bus flies by doing 40. And now we have the sidewalks on 522. I use them all the time, but you see people walking up and down the street all the time. Yeah. Because, it's kind of like a field of dreams. If you build it, people will come, right? If you build the infrastructure, people will use it. And that's kind of my belief with a lot of the improvements we're doing around bicycle and pedestrian safety is if we build it, people are going to use it. And we're seeing that. And we're seeing also massive increases in safety, which is, I think, worth every penny.
Agreed. What do you think has been the biggest challenge? Not just since mayor, but since being on council?
I think it's one of our top priorities is figuring out how we're going to address affordable housing. I think that brings up a lot of feelings in people. And we saw that earlier this year with work that the city was doing to partner with Plymouth Housing to build some housing that would have been affordable to people making 0 to 30% of the area median income. There was a lot of pushback on that. And the council ended up changing direction, not going forward with that. And that was challenging because there had been a lot of work that had gone into that. Mm-hmm. And there's also the work we're going to be doing later this year, kind of related to that is, the state passed a bill 2 years ago, I think, around missing middle housing, and which mandates the cities have to allow different forms of housing. You can't just have single family housing, and that's the only thing that's allowed.
Right.
And it's a needed tool because part of the reason why we're facing the housing crisis we're facing now is just a lack of inventory. There aren't. I heard the stat from the governor, and I looked into it, and it checks out. We're the least housed state in the country as far as like units of housing per family unit. Mm-hmm. And as much as people like to talk about how different the housing market is from the rest of the economy, supply and demand still factors in heavily. And if you don't have enough housing prices are going to go up. And we've seen in other areas, I'm thinking of Austin right now, they recently really loosened up their zoning to allow people to have the freedom to build different types of housing on their lots. And they got a massive increase in housing construction. And with that, they actually saw rents going down. And that is an issue that as a state, we all need to be working on. And that's something that as a city now, because of the state bill that was passed, we now have to address. And so I think we'll be doing that later this year. It stirred up a lot of feelings with people a couple of years ago when we were talking about it before the state passed their mandate, but we have to do it. So we need to figure out what that's going to look like and how we make that work for Kenmore and kind of fit in with the character of Kenmore. But we are going to have to allow more and different types of housing to be built because not everybody needs, a 2,500 square foot McMansion.
I'm glad you said that.
Yeah.
That was one thing I learned when I had Debbie Bent and Todd Hall on the podcast, and just the size increase over the last several decades for housing is just like human beings don't actually need that,
Yeah, I think it's really interesting when we see new houses going in. What you see going in are houses that take up as much of the lot as they possibly can. And so you end up with these, 3,000 square foot boxes getting dropped in neighborhoods with, not a whole lot of yard or anything like that.
Right.
And, if we did missing middle housing right, instead of getting a 3,000 square foot box, what you could get, with one front door, you could get two 1,500 square foot duplex units, or you could get three 1,000 square foot like stacked flats or something that then have more than one family using up the same amount of space. And they could look very similar to single family houses. I think they could fit in with neighborhoods quite well, but we need to have that discussion with folks because there are concerns about neighborhood character and parking and all sorts of stuff. But we need to work through those, and we need to meet what the state has mandated to us because we don't really have an option around that. And frankly, it's something that we need to be doing anyway, because you can't just put a dome over a city and make it not change. The city needs to be constantly changing in order to or it dies, I think. So
I agree. Yeah.
But also we just need to build more housing because we just don't have enough. My daughter's 17 now, and I'm trying to figure out like where is she going to be able to afford to live when she eventually moves out,
I do know. My 21-year-old daughter lives with us, and I have looked and looked and looked, and it's like she can't afford. She can't. I was able to move out at 18 and afford an apartment with my retail job. That's just not the reality anymore.
No, and that reality. The reason why that is reality is because of policy changes that folks have made over the last 50 years.
Yeah.
We just have not built enough housing. We've essentially frozen a huge chunk of our residential zoning to only accommodate one single type of housing. And that has kind of put us into the corner where we are right now. So we need to do that. It's going to take a lot of time, and it's going to take every city working together. But I think it's something that we can solve. I just don't think I think it's going to take a generation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, which is unfortunate.
How would you like to see residents get more involved, not just in this conversation about housing, but just in local government in general?
I mean, the city has a lot of great opportunities. The easiest thing to say is, come to a city council meeting, participate in our public comment period, which is great. We love that. We love seeing new folks. We love seeing old folks, but we like seeing folks coming to city council and telling us about what their concerns are. People can also email us, but also, there's coffee with councils, which are these kind of casual conversations that we have on one Saturday morning every month, and then one Monday morning every month. I don't have the details in front of me, but people can find those on the council's website at kenmorelaw.gov. And then the city also has just a lot of great ways to volunteer. People can go get certified and go work on emergency management stuff as a way to kind of give back to the community. We have great community groups doing parks cleanups every single Saturday through the Snow King Watershed Association Coalition. There's just lots of ways that people can plug in if they want to. And it doesn't all have to be related to city things. Like there's a lot of really great, we call them co-creators in the city doing some really fun stuff. And they're always looking for people to come out and help them. So I would really encourage folks to go do some of the park cleanups that one of our planning commissioners, Tracy Banasensky, leads at Swamp Creek or down at Tlaquatees, pulling weeds and dealing with blackberries and all that sort of stuff. It's a great kind of community event. And I think it's almost every Saturday at this point. So.
Agreed. And the parks look beautiful. So thank you to those who are doing that. It's amazing.
They have cleared an enormous amount of space over at Swamp Creek.
Right.
It's kind of amazing. And part of why that works is because our city has very much a attitude of trying to find a way to say yes to folks. A
Hmm.
lot of cities wouldn't allow a group of volunteers to essentially work unsupervised in their parks, right?
Right.
But Tracy built up trust with our public works folks. And, if you go there to volunteer, they usually have one of the trailers from our public works department with shovels and all the tools that people need and gloves and all that stuff. So it's a
Yeah.
great partnership where, the city is getting essentially free work out of folks. Folks are able to do stuff it's satisfying. It's satisfying to walk out there and see just the massive change
Hmm.
that just acres have been cleared of blackberries over the last few years. It's kind of wild, but
Yeah.
it's also kind of just it's a fun way to kind of build community and do things as in community with your neighbors.
I agree. It's very cool. It's cool to see that collaboration with neighbors and yeah, very, very cool. If you were somewhere where people had no idea what Kenmore was, how would you describe Kenmore to somebody?
Well, I would say we are I'm not going to hide the ball. We are a suburb of Seattle. We're at I like to say we're at the crown of Lake Washington, right on the northern tip of Lake Washington with the Sammamish River running through us. We're a city of 25,000, give or take, full of wonderful parks, great access to the water, and really easy access to either the east side, to Bellevue or down to Seattle. Actually, that's part of the reason why my wife and I bought where we did also beyond just being a place to raise our daughter was she was working in Bellevue and I was working in Seattle, and it made a great kind of made great sense for us to be in a place where we can both easily get to work.
Yeah.
So we're centrally located, great parks, wonderful community. We have fun as a city, which I'm not sure other cities have as much fun as we do with our summer concert series and the movies in the square and our farmers market and all that sort of thing. So that's how I would describe Kenmore, I think.
I would too.
Also, the thing that I like to say too is, we're a small city, but I think we punch above our weight. We have taken swings on things that cities bigger than us maybe wouldn't do until they saw us doing that. And, we've tried bold things. We've done big stuff. And that's something I really appreciate about, being a city our size is that we can be versatile. We can take some big swings every once in a while. And that's satisfying.
Very much agree. What would you say you're most excited about for the future of Kenmore?
This will sound a little cliche if you've talked to too many people, but I think the potential for something at Lake Point is undeniable. It's a Lake Point, for the people who don't know, it's a peninsula that goes into Lake Washington. It's right next to where the Sammamish River enters into Lake Washington. And it's 40 some odd acres that is the last kind of developable piece of land on Lake Washington. Right now it's being used for like storing cars and, rocks and materials. Yeah. But there is enormous potential there for something that could really change the city. We're chasing after some grant money from King County that could help us possibly purchase some of it for park development, but there's tremendous opportunities there. We need to be careful with that opportunity also because the peninsula was essentially built on top of a dump. They scraped up houses when they built I-5 and they piled them out there and then they put a bunch of dirt on top of it. And so we do need to be careful before we do anything there to make sure that environmentally it's sound. But the potential there, it could be real game changing for the city if we get something successful built on that land. It could be a whole new downtown. It could be a central park. It could be both of those things.
Yeah.
There's a lot of potential there. So that's the thing that I'm excited about, but also stresses me out because it's very high risk, high reward sort of situation, I think. And we've been looking at it since, I think the first Lake Point plan came out before we were incorporated. So, I'll believe it when it actually happens.
Sure.
I have to hold out hope just because of the potential.
Absolutely. Yeah. It seems like we're a little bit closer than we have been in the past. So hope is not unreasonable.
No, it's not. I felt the same way a couple of years ago, and then the developer then walked away. So,
Okay.
I felt a little snake bit after we had put in all this work with the previous developers looking at it. But I think the opportunity that we have to get some county funding to help us at least purchase part of the land along the water and restore that is a real step in the right direction. So we'll see how that plays out and see if we can make that work.
Awesome. Is there anything else you want the folks of Kenmore to know before we sign off?
I know it's really easy for folks to pay attention to like federal politics and all of that. But what happens at the city level, frankly, affects your life more than what's going on in DC. And I know it's not as exciting, maybe, but it does affect your day-to-day life. And I would encourage folks to just, make sure they're reading the newsletters from the city, sign up for the email list, take a look at our agendas when they come out. They're not super exciting, but you may see something in there that you care about, and then you can let us know what you think, because city council members can't read minds. We need to hear from folks if people have opinions about what we're doing or good or bad. We need to hear from folks.
Right.
And that is something that sometimes can be a little lacking, because I think we kind of fall under a lot of people's radar. And I think the more public input we have, the better job we can all do and the better city we can build together. So
very well said. Well, Mayor, this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for carving out time.
Of course.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Let's Talk Kenmore. Be sure to check back for more interesting topics and conversations. And as always, don't forget to ask yourself, where's the fun?